Welcome. We are here with the ASIS local chapter panel discussion on transitioning from law enforcement to the private sector. I'm Ryan Smith with Titan Protection. We're here in partnership with Jess Flores, who also does the Next Shift podcast that focuses right on this this topic itself. So thank you everybody for coming. Jess, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me and let us use this studio. This is way fancier than I'm used to recording a podcast in. Also, thank you for Terry Owens with Shamrock for putting this together and getting this panel of people together. With us, we have Logan Rivers and Tim Kile. Super excited to chat with you guys all about what the heck has happened since law enforcement.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good time.
Appreciate you guys coming on.
And we're going to leave room for some questions from the audience. We want to hear from you guys. What questions do you have for the panel? We obviously have a list that we're going to go through, but we want to hear from you, maybe what questions you have or what you've experienced yourself and if it relates to anything that we're talking about. So I want to do a round robin introduction. I know you just introduced yourself, Ryan, but if you could go ahead, who you are, what got you into law enforcement, how long have you been out?
Sure. Yeah, man, that feels like it's been a while ago. But I started actually here in Overland Park as a security officer at age 18 and worked through college doing that and then went into law enforcement in 2002. First department I worked for was Salina, Kansas, out in the middle of Kansas. And that was a different time. That was right on the heels of 9/11. It was really hard to get on, so I was applying everywhere. And so I cut my teeth out there, worked for a few years and got some great experience, and then ended up coming back to Johnson County, which is where I'm from. I grew up in this area. Had some family issues. Mom had a cancer scare. Dad passed away, so I just figured it was time to be back in Kansas City. So I applied a few departments. Roland Park up in the northeast Johnson County was the first agency that took me. So went and worked there for several years and was kind of at a point where I had always had aspirations of starting my own company. And so I was trying to balance that. At the time, I didn't have a family. If I was going to fail, that was the time to do it. So I was either going to go to a larger department or start this company. And so I took the leap and left and started a security guard company called Titan Protection. And really the rest is history. Have done that. And the business now has around 500 employees. We're in a few different markets. And we do some video camera monitoring that we do nationwide. And it's been a great experience. But yeah, that's how I got started.
I love to hear that. Most cops don't think entrepreneurship. That's not in their blood to think risk risk for the job maybe, but not the unknown of what a business might be like. And you've just made it explode, which is incredible.
It's been great. Yeah, I wish I could say that was deliberate. It was probably more out of ignorance than anything. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Logan, I want to ask you, because you're from the Missouri side like me, so please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into that field.
Logan Rivers. It started as a police officer right out of college. It's one of those things. I really enjoyed criminology going through university, and I got out of college in around 2010, right at after the recession. So a lot of no job opportunities that were really clear. Lived in my dad's basement under his heel for a minute as I'm looking for jobs, applying to any department I could really find. Target had been major to major city, wasn't really particular about one. And Joplin, Missouri was the first one to call me up and say, hey, we'd love you to come down. And I remember you're touching on how scarce the jobs were. And I remember 115, 120 people applying for 5 positions in the room, and how, I was like, wow, I made it. I guess I'm a cop now. So, but yeah, worked at Joplin for 8 years, got to do a little bit of everything from 2010 to 2018. Started as a patrolman, cutting my teeth, overnights, eves, and then found myself on days, gotten tight with the traffic guys. I get a lot of flack probably, but I really enjoyed traffic. Didn't ever have a desire to go towards detectives. Did that, got on the motor unit in Joplin, and that the last 5 years I was on the force. Moved out in 2018, like I mentioned, took an opportunity with Amazon in their loss prevention department in Kansas City, and then quickly worked up the ramps, which we'll talk about, I'm assuming, a little bit more, and then found myself most recently at Ulta Beauty doing regional level leadership for their corporate team. So
I love that transition. I really hate that you're the guy that gives us all a bad name in the police world for their traffic love, but that's okay.
We'll
We'll move past that, and I think there's so many people looking to go corporate security security with either what you're doing or what you went through. Amazon is a huge company and very police friendly, which I think a lot of people want to hear. And just from what I know from personal experience, it's a hell of a process to go through to get there. So it's another one of those things, almost like policing, where you get in and you're like, holy crap, I did that. I can be proud of this. And who doesn't want to work for Amazon?
Absolutely. Right.
Tim, let's move to you and tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
Yeah, Tim and Kyle. I started out in executive protection. I was working for a religious figure. I was traveling around 320 days a year. When you're 18, 19, 20 years old, it's kind of the life. You know, you get to see the world, you get to do this.
Yeah.
And then I met my wife, and if you are married, you know, if you really want to have a marriage, you actually have to see each other. We wanted to have a family.
Weird concept.
Yeah, part of having a family is actually, you know, that one moment, those special moments that you have conceiving children, and if you're in two different nations, kind of difficult. So as I did my travels, we did a lot of domestic things, and I just found that some of the people that I really enjoyed being around were law enforcement. You could see the camaraderie, the way the guys talk to each other, the way they razz each other, and I just felt that was something I really wanted to do. And at the time, I was in Southern California. I shotgunned my app anywhere I could do it. First place was Huntington Beach that picked me up. Was there just under 10 years, got into a little bit of a pursuit, pit the guy out, and ended up in oncoming traffic. Since then, had to medical out. That was pretty tragic for me because that was something that I really enjoyed doing, making a difference in life. We moved out here to Kansas City to try to find a slower pace. I had 2 kids and hooked up with a security company out here, did a lot of training, got back into the executive protection world, started traveling again. Kids started whining about wanting to be around their dad, and then COVID hit, and all of travel shut down.
Yeah.
So I had to figure something out, and so now I found a corporate protection or corporate security job for a financial institution on here. So I've been there for about 3 years, and enjoying sitting behind a desk getting fat. So yeah.
Happens to the best of us.
I know. Yeah, that's the one thing about being a cop. You usually got to move around a little bit. Now it's just just watching the money come in and go out. But,
well, thank you for sharing. I think there's something to be said about the unexpected transitions. You're just doing your job one day and all of a sudden, oh gosh, it's gone. Like, what the heck do I do? And that's something we'll touch on in just a little bit. But I want to ask the 3 of you, who thought about their transition before it actually happened? Because I, for one, did not.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta jump in here.
Yeah.
You know, in 2018, I was going through a particular time with the police department where I was kind of one of those officers that had been around and done about everything, right? So you're either looking at promotion, going to corporal, or going in for the long haul as a beat cop, working down in the lower ranks. And at the time, we were going through a FOP situation with the city of Joplin, and there was a lot of frustration, I think, and that's what forced me to start kind of looking out. I actually had a cold call from a friend that I went to university with that said, hey, I know you're going through some tough times with the department. Would love to have you talk to my husband about a job at Amazon, right? And I'm sitting here thinking I just need to, buckle down, just grit. This is what law enforcement is. Just, takes time. And then I got to talking with this former Shawnee, Kansas police officer who was running the loss prevention team up at Amazon. And he told me about his transition out of law enforcement. And he really kind of put that bug in my head. And he said he'd be hiring in about a month or 2. So I really started planning out then. And then when I saw the $4 an hour pay increase, I was like, you know what? After 4 years of no pay increase, it's time to look out. So So I did put a little bit of planning into it, and I think it really paid off having that mentor outside that was out doing things outside of public work.
100%. I think your network, they always say, is your net worth, but I mean, it really is true. It's who you know, what rooms are you getting into like this, what rooms virtually or physically that you're getting into, and what connections are you making, how can they help you? Maybe not today, but later, in making the genuine conversations and genuine connections. You touched on something, you're like, I had done everything really, and that is huge for cops. And for even since I've gotten out, once I hit that goal that I had, I'm just like, well, shit, what do I do now? And it's time to move on. So talk about that just a little bit. You hit it all. You're like, all right. Did you just say, okay, well, I'm going to try a new challenge?
Yeah,
or?
and I think there was a little bit of disappointment too, right? When you work for a mid-major city, there's just not going to be a lot of opportunities to promote to corporal. And, I went through the testing process and I did make it, right? I just wasn't picked out of the handful of folks, great officers that went through the process. And I saw myself waiting for another 3 to 5 years, with the rotation and the list that they build up. So, I think that's really what caused me to think, okay, I need to do something else to maybe transition my family and myself or what this looks like.
So what made
outside.
you want to go that route, maybe Amazon or corporate security versus another department where maybe there was more opportunity?
Right. And, when I got out of college, I thought, I wanted to go work for a big city, Wichita, Kansas City, somewhere close by, growing up in Kansas. And going to Joplin, it was that mid-major, right? And, I always wanted to be in the city, right? And I think that's where opportunity was. And, when I left Joplin, it was a 200-mile, move for my family, selling house, moving family, moving kids, up for an opportunity that it was hourly. And to be honest with you, it was an hourly opportunity that I didn't know if I was going to cut it or not. So I think, I got over this ability to take a risk. Right. I think that's what a lot of officers that I've spoken with over the time that are looking out, they're afraid of that jump. They're afraid of that leap. Yeah. So, I think that planning is what, that planning with Chris, I'll give him a shout out, Chris Dunn, he really kind of put me in the mindset of stepping out of law enforcement into the private sector. Yeah. And he did that over about a month and a half of communication. Okay. So.
And one thing I want to touch on while we're still having this conversation is you had a family. So the transition is never easy on just us ourselves, but you had a family to worry about and to think about. What was that discussion of, I think I'm going to give this a hang up and go try something else? Like, what was that like for you and your wife?
It was, I think, tough personally because I was on the motor team. I was really proud of what I did as a motorcycle unit. And, giving up the Harley, giving up, the badge, the uniform, when you do a job, I'm sitting here at 8 years, but it becomes who you are, part of your identity, right? And I gave that up, My ex-wife at the time was very supportive of me, but not necessarily liked the role or the job. So she was ecstatic moving into the Kansas City area. My kids were still little enough. I thought, this is the time, right? They're not going to remember anything from Joplin. Let's make this move now. But to be honest, it was kind of scary because there was not really any safety net.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Yeah, so the move was sad. I remember sitting with the chief of police doing my exit interview, and just to get a little vulnerable with you guys, I kind of cried a little bit. I was, because these are the people I've been working with, and been in shootings with them, chased bad guys, seen horrible things, and here I am going to work in a warehouse at Amazon.
Right. Yeah. So, did you have any involvement with ASIS prior to that, or did you look at them as a resource?
Like I mentioned Chris earlier, Chris was a member of the ASIS community, and he went for his CPP back when he was my manager at Amazon and got that and really kind of started putting that bug in about these professional organizations that really can network people, especially ex-law enforcement back in former military to throw those crowd in there too. Yeah. And I really credit him for really kind of just opening that door and having those conversations. So
yeah, I love that. Tim, obviously you don't get to plan that you're going to go to work, you're going to be involved in something and your career is going to end. I can attest to that as well. But maybe like me, you have this happen. What's the word I'm looking for? You fail to acknowledge that it's happening. You're like, nope, it's not over. It can't be over. There's no way. Yeah. So can you walk us through that a little bit in that process for you?
Yeah, just the acceptance of it. That's always the difficult part because you go from making a difference, at least you feel like you're making a difference, to now I'm in a warehouse staring at something, or you have to deal with real humans versus ordering people around and they actually listen to you and do mostly what you ask them to do. That was difficult. It was also difficult for me to move from my space, which was the West Coast. Love the West Coast mostly. We just needed to find a place that was a little bit cheaper where we could afford, maybe I could live off what my medical pension could give us. And so coming out here, starting all over, I literally was in a bathrobe for like 3 months, standing on my porch with coffee, just trying to figure out what am I going to do now I have to grow up. Yeah. So that was a difficult time. Lucky, the roads that I had done in executive protection prior to being law enforcement, being close to LA, I did a little bit in LA. I wanted to get out of just security in general because I was kind of burnt out, wanted to get away from guns and bulletproof vests and the stress of any moment now it could kick off. And so I tried photography for a while. I learned I don't get along with some people. And so I got back into the security world, did some training, got involved with a really good company out here. and then just kind of tried to use some of the experiences I had as law enforcement in the security world, which, you know, there's a little bit easier transition to like a Titan or to any other companies out there. But I got involved in ASIS early on when I came out here, made some really good connections out here. It's just one of those things where it is who you know. It's better to get the job that you never interview for.
Right.
And
100%.
so, I learned that from Terry Owens.
Don't give him credit for anything.
I try
Come
not
on
to.
now.
I try not to, but his bald head is just he's so cute.
Terry's not in the room, just everybody. He's going to hear this.
He's listening though.
He's listening around the corner, so
We're going to see him in that window pretty soon.
yeah, no, but just coming to the realization of, hey, this is not what I'm probably going to do for the rest of my life now, and you know all the aspirations you had of, you know, working some of the very cool details that some of the officers get to do. That was a huge disappointment for me. And I think the biggest transition for me was making a difference, you know, seeing bad guys go to jail versus coming out and now you're in the private world and you're helping other people make money and you're not, it's just that transition for me, and still is a bit of an issue. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because purpose is huge for law enforcement. We all feel like we have one, and it is serving our community. And man, for me too, it took a lot of time to, in my brain, switch around what is my purpose. And I want to say I was out like 6 or 7 years before the idea for Next Shift came up, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can still serve a community. It just looks completely different. So I'm glad you touched on that purpose. You're doing it now, like you said, you're doing it for other people and making them make money. And sometimes I need somebody to tell me, like, what is my purpose here?
Yeah.
What part of the mission am I actually doing here, for it to make sense in my brain, for it to be like, oh, okay. So you said you're struggling with that now. What do you think could help you find that purpose?
that's a tough question. So glad this is live. So it gives me several seconds to think about it. You know, probably some side hobbies. I'm getting involved in something called the Battle Within.
Yes.
And so that has kind of helped me. There were some pretty traumatic stuff going to being a cop in California, as you can imagine, some of the calls we had to go on. Some of the SIDS calls were a little difficult for me, especially when my kid was about the same age. And so when I was given the opportunity to retire, I didn't really fight it.
Yeah.
I do regret some of that some days. Now I look at the culture now and I'm like, well, I'm kind of glad I didn't fight it, because the
Amen
culture
to
now
that.
being a cop is,
Right.
I
tough.
respect any guys that are in it longer than 20 years. You're made of iron. You could probably spit acid if you had to, these guys nowadays. But yeah, no, it was tough, but finding something outside where I still feel like I'm doing something,
Yes.
right? So, you know, helping some guys with some PTSD or just anything that I can do where I don't feel like I'm just pushing paper around. So hobbies, but just anything that I can find, just to try to make a difference in somebody else's life other than mine. I find it's getting there. It's getting better. But yeah, things like that for me are big.
Yeah,
So,
really paying it forward with what you do know and what you have been through and how it can help that next person coming through, I think has been one of the lifesavers for me personally. It's one of those things where sometimes we just have to take a job and we have to do it. We have to make our money, make sure our bills are paid. And one thing I like to tell my clients is, what were your passions? What did you have a passion and purpose for? Because maybe that's where you lean in. You either do volunteer work or you do something on the side that really just lifts you up and makes you fill your cup,
Yeah.
so that you're going to work. Sure, you're getting your bills paid. That's great. But this is what I do, and this makes me feel a passion. And with that, I want to go over to Ryan. I mean, obviously, you've started a whole company. You're
Right.
employing tons of people. What has it been like for you?
Whew, quite the roller coaster for sure. I mean, and you know, thinking about the transition for me, I kind of gave myself some space to fail in the sense that I was at a spot in my life where I didn't have family. I thought, if I want to do this, this is the time to do it, because if I fail, I can still go back to. And so I gave myself kind of that. I took the leap, and you know, that was in 2008. But I was also, you know, I got into it out of pure ignorance, in the sense of, when I said I wanted to start a company, it was the only thing I knew, because it was the only thing I'd done since I was 18. And so I thought, well, you know, maybe I can do this a little bit differently. So the ignorant part was, I didn't know anything about business or running a business or doing any of that. So I kind of got a crash course in that, and a lot of the things I thought, and had I known the things that I should have been scared of, I don't think I ever would have done it. So, I mean, there's a piece of that where there is a leap of faith, but I mean, it's been a wild ride from law enforcement and going into the corporate side or the private side. When you're in law enforcement, nobody talks to you about spreadsheets and numbers, and it's not a revenue game. It's a whole different, the wins are different. And so you get into the private sector, and I think that's the same whether it's for business or, whatever it may be. We have people to answer to that are interested in the dollar and cents and the money. And so that's a whole different world of blending those things together. And I think that can be quite a shock for folks coming from one side to the other. Is it's a completely different language, completely different culture. And that's why I think the mentors in ASIS and Chris Dunn jumped in the comments and he said he's listening to you and appreciates the shout out. But the other thing that can help you with is making that transition, but you can also see a peek to the other side through them and find out, is that for me, or is that, because grass isn't always greener on the other side. And as you were telling your story, I was kind of interested, being medically retired, if you were able to go back and change anything, would you still be in law enforcement, or would you say I'm kind of silver lining, ended up on the other side?
So the culture then probably.
Right.
I would definitely, and most of that for me is the camaraderie, like the coffees and the hanging out, waiting. Like in Huntington, like in California in general, it only rains like 4 times a year.
Right.
So when it does rain, you kind of seek shelter, and we would sit around as a squad and just the squad parties and just the stuff, like that's the stuff that I miss.
Right.
Like being a part of a solid team.
Right.
To where, you have a party or some type of event, they come and, it's that part I would definitely go back to. But watching what these boys have to go through today, I don't think I could do it.
Different ball game.
Yeah, we didn't even have cameras or anything back then. I couldn't imagine the stuff that we got away with, in general.
Yeah.
It's just a different police world now.
Sure.
Like you just have to be a different creature, and that I'm not that creature.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
looking back now, I probably want to hang it and fight a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But if it was to go back today, I don't think I could do it.
Well, and to that, I think that may be a factor a lot of folks out there may be thinking about making the transition, is it's not the same as it was. And, when I got in 2002 on the heels of 9/11, people would come up and thank you for your service.
Yeah.
It was a whole different, ball game. And so I think it's certainly a timely conversation.
I think that's important what you brought up, because we were talking beforehand. All of us were kind of around a 10-year mark when we were like, yep, time to go. And when I look back over my career, every 4-ish years was kind of when the burnout hit, and I was like, I need something else. And if you are not getting off of patrol, if you're not giving yourself a different goal or a different challenge, you're really just setting yourself for failure and getting burned out, and you're not developing the skills that can help you if tomorrow your career is gone.
Right.
Like Tim and I know, like it can happen like that, and you're like, wow, okay, this happened. So that 10-year mark is actually a majority of people I talk to.
Right.
That 8 to 11-year mark is when people are wanting to get out, and they're wanting to be like, do I go corporate? Do I go completely away from law enforcement? What do I do? And I think that's very intriguing that we were all right around that 10-year mark.
It's a gut check time. Because too, from a timing perspective, if you aren't going to stay in law enforcement, you're losing that experience on the other side that you
absolutely.
may be. And so, it's time to thread that needle. But we've got a couple questions too. I don't know if you want to jump into any of those.
I want to say
now.
one thing
Please
really
do.
quick to you, because you said it and I'll forget because I didn't take a note. You said you gave yourself permission to fail, which, man, as a cop, that is hard to swallow.
Yeah.
Like, we do not fail. It's almost ingrained in us from the academy. And I can tell you, going into entrepreneurship myself, I love to fail. It just means I'm trying. There is no such thing as failure.
And that's
huge. You knew that.
And I'm a really competitive person. So when I say I give myself room to fail, it was more the excuse that I wasn't letting my family members down, or I was allowing myself to fail for myself in the sense that I wasn't taking anybody else down with me. When I got into it and I found out how difficult it was, there was certainly times when I thought I can't do this, or I shouldn't be doing this, or maybe this was a bad idea. And so I think just having the grit to keep putting one foot in front of the other is also part of it. So when I say I gave myself room to fail, I also wouldn't let myself, that's also part of what helped me keep it going, was not giving up and allowing myself to stand back up. And
entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. I've learned you've really got to have some oomph in there to keep going when it's like, oh man, what's happening?
Yeah. It has its good days and its bad days for sure.
Well, go ahead with those questions. What do we got?
And starting here, I want to think the first one that came in was talking about interview selection process, and what's the biggest mistake you see law enforcement officers make during the private sector interview?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here.
Yes, please.
For the last several years, that's really my job has been in loss prevention is hiring a lot of professionals in to come fill roles. From Amazon, when I ran the Chicago region, covering a vast part of the Midwest, I was hiring folks that were in the hourly level role sets that were doing investigations. I was hiring managers that were coming in, and I had lots of law enforcement folks that would apply through the roles. And anybody that's listening today that's applied for an Amazon job knows it's tough, right? It's tough to even just get a response back, one. But when you do get through, there's a whole series of panels and different interviews that you have to go through. And the biggest thing that I would coach my LE and my military folks through was find a way to turn the story of what you did on the street into something practical in the office, right? If you're using cop lingo, you're going to turn off somebody that doesn't have that experience. I'm a little bit more forgiving because I've been it, I've lived it, I've done it.
Right.
But that was the biggest piece of feedback that I saw a lot of folks. If they grasped it, they got it.
Right.
But if it didn't make sense to them, they weren't necessarily all the way out of law enforcement anyway.
Right.
Because I found that the officers that were wanting to get out of law enforcement were finding ways to weave their stories, their experiences into an office setting rather than, I chased a bad guy down the street, and then I took evidence.
And again, where a mentor can come in, somebody that's been there,
Absolutely.
done that, can help you with that lingo or the formats of questions and interviews and answers and things like that.
Absolutely. And follow your formatting too. If you get a guide, if you get, preparation material, stick to it. Don't just think I can nail this interview. Really take it what it is. I know Amazon and both Ulta Beauty, when I worked there, it was really about situation, task, action, result, right? And tailor your questions that way.
Yep.
Tell me about the situation, the task that you took, the actions that you did, and then the results.
Yep.
So.
Has anybody ever surprised you in that scenario? Because I run into that a lot too, where somebody may not be great in an interview, but they do good at the job you're trying, or vice versa. Somebody might be really good at interviewing, and
yeah, absolutely. And I would say that some of these folks, I would say, hey, like, I love your energy, I love the excitement that you have for this role. I'm going to help you clean it up a little bit.
Right.
And then, me being me, I work with a group of hiring folks that are going to be eventually hiring these people. If I really, liked this person's energy, or they were trying to meet me halfway, I can preface that conversation with the next person that's going to be interviewed. But, there are a couple that would, surprise through. I think my getting into Amazon was kind of unique as well, because here I am frustrated at the job, thinking I'm on my way out,
Right.
And working for Chris. Chris is a former police officer, so he knows what I've been through.
Right.
And when I got promoted to manager in KCK, I had a frank conversation with Chris about my hiring process. He's like, yeah, a lot of these people that didn't work in cop jobs didn't want you. But I could see what you were going to bring to the table as an investigator, and I took a chance.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to do. That's what I do at every organization, is try to find a way to bring in high quality talent, because there are so many officers and military folks that are leaving that are high quality talent that just get washed under. So.
And
Yeah.
why do you think that is? I'm curious. Is it a culture thing?
I think it is knowing the lingo. I think
Yeah.
you know how to talk the talk. Being in a private sector, using metrics, Excel sheets, data, projects. As a police officer, you're thinking, yeah, I put my hands on this guy and performed CPR and brought him back to life, or I took evidence that solved a case.
Right.
But how are we applying that to what senior manager Jim that runs a production on the floor? What's he going to think of the story? How's he going to apply it? So.
And is that what, when you said some people on the Amazon, the non-law enforcement, didn't want you, was that a cultural thing, or a lack of?
I think it was just they didn't know how to take my personality, because it's just funny because at Amazon they run a pretty robust security operation in these big fulfillment centers, and part of it and the hourly level role that I took was standing out there and watching the associates come and go. Right. I had a manager that was not a law enforcement officer come up and tell me, hey, Logan, you need to politely remove the stick from your ass.
Right.
Because, you got that stance, you got that stand, you're standing there, your authority, and then you move into another role. And I think that's a big thing for applicants to really remember. Like, you're no longer the person of authority. You're now the person that is going to be working for the authority.
Right.
So, and it's a little bit different.
And can you talk about that for a minute? Because I think that's a huge culture shock. Somebody else was just talking about going to, I want to say it was Ulta, and you basically have to stand by and watch people steal things when you're no longer a cop because of the rules and things that are out there now, or Best Buy, I can't remember.
It is.
But what is that like I was a cop yesterday, today I am this loss prevention person, and I really just got to let a lot of things go. What was that like, and how did you fight through that, I guess?
Yeah, and organized retail crime is a terrible trend that's going on across the country right now. It's not just Ulta Beauty or even the Amazon retail. fronts. But I think from a law enforcement perspective, coming from LE into private sector, it's really understanding the role and putting on a different hat. I think a lot of us, think that, we've talked about wearing the uniform becomes part of our identity, and you have to be able to shed that, or at least put it in the closet. Bad pun, I don't know, but just get rid of that persona, and really think with a risk mindset rather than, an action mindset, right?
For sure.
Obviously there's a time for action, right? And I got a specific, for instance, at Amazon where a gun fell onto the floor, right? Obviously I'm going to go pick up that gun, I'm going to secure it, and I'm going to, make sure it's safe.
Right.
Found out the hard way, that's not what we do at Amazon, right? I did what I thought was right. But it ended up, being something different. Good learning lesson.
Sure.
But that's where those mentors and having people above you, having that sponsor, so to speak, above you, really help out in that transition.
How long did that take you to kind of shed that cop mentality and cop mindset when you were at work and adapt what they wanted you to do?
I still struggle with it a little bit, to be honest with you. It's because, like I said, it becomes your identity.
Yeah.
But it took me about a year of really forcing the smile on the floor, because you walk around and you kind of get that cop face.
Well, and it's a service thing too, because you don't run into that in the public sector. It's not like if somebody doesn't like how you're treating them, they can say, "Well, we're going to use your competitor police department." There's so it's not needed. But you get into the private and you find out really quick that a smile goes a long way, and people have the option of saying, we don't want to use you. We have other options. And I think that can be a culture shock for law enforcement.
Absolutely.
Losing our directness a little bit.
Those soft skills, they're super important.
They are.
Yes.
Very much so. What other questions did we have from the audience for now?
So, somebody else asked, how do you get into executive important figure protection? I think that one might go to you. That came after you were telling your story.
Yeah,
and
no,
your background.
I've probably got close to 20 years and I've been to 45 countries. I've done a whole bunch, and it is who you know. If you're a little bit younger, if you're just coming out of the military and you have the GI Bill, there's a couple good schools in Vegas that you can go and they'll pay for it. That starts to create your network, because a lot of those EP schools, executive protection schools that you go to, what they're really doing is they're just cherry picking. Like they'll have 15 people that go through the school, and there might be one or two that are like, okay, this guy can actually do the job. The other 10 or 11 are like, well, good luck. Hope you find a job.
Right.
So you just find some of those reputable schools out there, do what you do, show up on time, look sharp, look the part. And eventually they'll give you some small jobs. You meet some guys, network, go to some of the big conferences, meet other people, hang out. If you're a drinker, you're set. It's a big drinking community. And, it is who you know. And eventually they'll need, hey, we just need a guy for 2 days. You go, the client meets you, the client likes you. Client says, hey, whoever this guy is, hey, I like this Tim guy. He's good looking. Look at the way he dresses.
Wow.
Looks the part. He needs to come with us. That's what happened with me. Not that I was good looking, because God knows I'm not. But it was just something about me that the client liked, and the soft skills that we talked about. Smiling when people look at you, that's super important. But just being able to like the domestic violence. Cops and they learn those soft skills, how to talk to people, because you go from a death notification to domestic violence to a traffic accident. You learn those are the soft skills. If you can learn to transition that into the private world, that makes a huge difference, because you have to learn how to talk to people.
Right.
So but when it comes to executive protection, go to a school, find a good reputable school, do the best you can.
Is the
meet
work
some people.
consistent? Is it feast or famine type of?
It depends. And it's getting bigger and bigger, especially with the law enforcement defunding. Like the departments are getting smaller, so there are opportunities. Kansas City's kind of light, so that's why I had to travel so much.
Right.
Choosing this city was probably not the best for my career, but I still have some connections if I want to travel. I have a couple more years. My boy's 16, so when he turns 18, I'm probably go back on the road possibly. It just depends on my current what I'm doing now. It's all about who you know, and because you'll meet guys like if you're with a A-type actor and you go to like a show or like the Emmys or Grammys or whatever these wonderful red carpet things are, and you're standing next to another actor and his guy's standing next to you, you talk. Hey man, what's going on? Oh yeah. Oh man, I've been on the road for like 14 days, dude. I've been on 18. It's like struggling. I don't have my underwear. I have had to like switch 3 times. I don't have anywhere to clean them. And so like you get his name, and then like you get along with each other, and he's like, hey, calls you like 10 days later. He's like, hey, I need another guy. We're struggling. What are you doing? I'm just actually sitting at home, just off. Well, come on, grab your passport and your bag and let's go. So it's, as long as you're a good, like you can get along with people, which, I mean, like I talked about getting along with your teammates and those coffees that you have and being part of a squad. When you're on EP, you're part of a team. You have to be able to get along with people. You have to eat shit sometimes, carry bags. You got to do the things that's not EP cool,
Right.
you know. But yeah, ultimately, if you want to get in the EP world, you got to go to school. They're now starting a board certification for executive protection, which that's the first time that's ever been, because you get big thugs and you get the guys who come out of Secret Service, and like there's such a huge mix of what EP is. But yeah, no, I would say if you want to get into it, find a school, kick ass while you're doing it, make connections with the people that are teaching it, and eventually you'll get a chance. And just don't screw up.
Screw it up.
Don't fart in a private plane.
I think Tim's really hitting too on something that's transferable, just not from EP, but also just in general, is networking and
Yes.
building your personal brand. I think it's a lot of things that a lot of officers that I speak with that are wanting or are seeking to get out, they don't do it very well. And they have to understand that the personal brand is really what's going to get them in the door for some of these conversations, some of these interviews.
Right.
And that's as
Absolutely.
simple as going on to LinkedIn, like platform we're on tonight, and taking a good headshot outside of uniform and portraying yourself as a professional out there. I'm an advocate for LinkedIn. I'm an advocate for being the 21st century resume and where we're going as a professional workforce. And so little things like that, networking, start building those networks on LinkedIn. Start sending a message to somebody that you know, and asking for a coffee chat.
Yeah.
These are little things that
Showing
will
up
go
at the
a long way.
ASIS meetings.
I mean,
I
there's
think
an
that's
option.
a big one, you know,
Yes.
too, that can help. And you mentioned resume, and I don't want to jump if
No,
you
go
had
ahead.
one more, but we had a question around resumes. And it says, with bots doing a lot of the resume screening, how can anyone get ahead of the pack? It seems like there's huge pushback from corporate America on hiring law enforcement or being able to get hired. So resume tips on...
And all the guys come to me, and that is actually something I don't do. I actually help you figure out who you are behind the badge. But there
Right.
are plenty of resources out there. Eric Vinto was one of them, I know. Sheepdog Resume. Get with people who have been on both sides of this and know how to translate your skills for you. You're probably going to have to put some money out there. And if you don't have it, ChatGPT is huge right
Yep.
now as well,
Absolutely.
and helping
Yep.
you know, go out and find the job that you're looking for. But you also have to really know what direction you're trying to go. Right now, I see so many people spraying and praying with their
Yep.
job applications and resumes, and you're like, oh my God, I'm trying to change it for this job and this job and this job. You're going to overwhelm yourself. I did that back in the day, and wow, was that hard. It only made it that much harder. So really have an idea of what type of role you're wanting to go to. So you've got that resume. You've got, you know, most job descriptions are going to have that same information in it. You're going to make it say some of the stuff that's in those job descriptions. And if you can't, or if you can, hire somebody to help you with what that looks like. Logan, do you have anything from the hiring perspective?
I mean, absolutely. The resume needs to make sense from a business perspective. If you're going to apply to be loss prevention, just because that's what I know, right? How can you show some kind of metric results in the experiences that you have? Because everything, all the operations leaders, all the safety leaders, all the human resources leaders that are going to be attached to these interview processes are going to want to see that you can speak it and it's on your resume, because they're going to get a copy of it when they sit down to interview you. So really making sure that the resume is clean and it's not very long. I
Yes.
see a lot of law enforcement folks that want to share all their accomplishments,
Right.
and they can easily get 3 or 4 pages long.
Yep.
Keep it as short and concise as possible. I
page.
would say 1 page, maybe with your education on page 2. But keep your experiences try to that front page. Because when I'm looking through, as a former person that was hiring, I'm going through hundreds and hundreds of applications. Now, at Ulta Beauty and at Amazon, I never really had to worry about bots clearing through. I'm sure there was some kind of bot, but I was manually going through and just pre-screening based off resume. So
And what stood out? I mean, what for me, I
Right.
always think of be well-rounded and not be so focused in one thing, or you said it earlier, make your resume match the job that you're going for.
Absolutely.
and that type of thing. But what stood out when you would screen
It's
resumes?
really the cleanliness of the resume, right? Does it flow? You know, is it very concise and to the point. And then, to be honest, I'm looking for somebody that shows that they're not necessarily a job hopper. And what I mean by job hopper is, because this is changing pretty dynamically as we kind of move forward with the job market. Like, if you were in law enforcement, right, and you have a history of jumping, every 6 months to a new agency, that's something you're going to have to be prepared to talk through, right? It's not necessarily a death sentence, but maybe even pull some of those agencies off that maybe weren't a great experience. And that way you can focus on what was and what sells you as the professional you are.
I couldn't agree more. The biggest red flag is the multiple job history. If somebody's had 3 jobs in the past year, why are we going to be any different? And I think if some people have a good answer for that, maybe it's family issues or moved around, or if you have a good answer for it. But yeah, the job hopping thing is a challenge.
Yeah, and like I've noticed it too. Coming from Joplin, I work 8 years with one agency, right? And as these officers are coming out, I encourage them, hey, if you were an FTO, make that a secondary promotion point within your experience. Show promotion trajectory as well. Something that I do on my resume, even though through Amazon I went through several promotions, I show every promotion as some kind of step or nod to the person maybe reviewing the resume, that, hey, this person has not only delivered results, but they've also been able to promote within the organization. So
I think that's important you touched on that, because a lot of people are that 20 and 25 year mark that are getting out, and now they need that second career. They're looking for that second career, and they're like, I've got one job on my resume, which is not the norm. But when you can show those different steps that you've taken, you've at least got something on there.
And it doesn't have to be big things. It doesn't have to be I was promoted to FTO, I was promoted to the traffic unit. It can be, I got a professional certification in this, and then, I led, several high profile cases. These are things that we can use to really, streamline that resume experience for the person that you're throwing it in front of. So,
and the people that are still in, you have the opportunity to look at your stats and get your stats, because metrics were not a thing on a cop resume. We never looked at that. And it's a word we've heard more often is like, you've got to have metrics on here. They need to see some numbers that are going to jump out and show what you've done and what you're capable of doing.
As a loss prevention professional now, working with several different organizations in different levels, I can tell you that the people skills that officers put on their resume, is very big to me, because you can be taught anything in the private sector. You really can. But I want to know how you are with people. And I think that's where officers excel in this process. They kind of undercut themselves, is that's all you do every day is talk to people. So use it, leverage it.
And I think that's where your network comes back into play as well, is when you can't see for yourself what all you've done or what accomplishments you have, talk to somebody and let them help you see what you're saying. Hold that mirror up and be like, you just told me all of this. What do you mean you don't know what you've accomplished or what you've done in your career? I think that's very, very, very big.
And speaking of network, I think that's a great transition. What next question we had is any tips and advice on building up the network? Because I agree wholeheartedly. I think networking and who's in your network is everything from that piece. I think finding somebody that has a job similar to what you're looking for to be able to find out, was it everything they thought it was, how they got there, how did they do that? But I mean, I still go back to ASIS is just a great way to get involved with some of those folks. But other people that have made this transition know what you're going through and are more likely to help you out. And so I think reaching out and identifying a few people that have done what you're trying to do is a good way to
absolutely. And there's finally a network of people who have done law enforcement and are now willing to talk about it, because back in 2016 when I got out, nobody was talking about leaving law enforcement, especially on purpose, or what the transition was like, or, oh, I had a family and now I'm leaving. And that is so much more of a topic now, even mental health. Hey, I left for my mental health. This just wasn't it anymore. And I think that's huge. People are willing to say it, but start that network somewhere. Start it on the job. Stop being so afraid to talk to people. Every role you take, I remember being a detective. You're meeting a whole new group of people when you become a detective. When you become a sergeant or a supervisor, you're talking to a whole new group of people in a whole different way. And I think starting there, get on social media, and maybe not Facebook because it's nothing but drama, no offense, but get on LinkedIn, where it's a professional platform where people are there to network for business, for what that next step is. And like I said, there's a whole group of us out here now willing to talk about this, and I have yet to meet one who's like, nope, not going to talk about it. Everybody's very willing and open. I mean, I met Logan on there, for goodness sake. And I met Terry on there, and I used to work at his department but had no clue who he was. And so now it's like this whole thing, and then I meet Logan's. I know. But I meet Logan, and now I have access to Logan's network. When we comment on each other's things, or I get on your profile or Tim's, and everybody is just collaborating. When we tagged each other on these posts, everybody's network is getting to see that.
Right.
So maybe you're scrolling through and you're like, oh, I like what that Logan guy said that one time. He's going to start looking at you and seeing what you have to offer. And then it's going to lead to somebody else. And
Or hopefully
warm
take it.
introductions are huge once you get them.
Yes.
Well, yeah, exactly. And Tim, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on this, only because you went from not expecting it to just jumping in. I mean, did you go down that path of trying to build up a network or reaching out, or how'd that?
Yeah, I'm the worst salesman for myself. I find I've done a whole lot. I at the time I didn't even think about a network.
Yeah.
Because the guys that I met before law enforcement, when I was working, like I said, when you work a contract and you meet other EP guys and you meet that's how you network. Like the guy next to you, and eventually he gets fired because he said something to the wrong person or looked at the client wrong. Then he goes to a different client, but then you just keep like, hey man, what are you doing this year? But it was those networks when I was sitting in my bathrobe and trying to figure out what to do in life as I stare at the bluebird chirping at me, making fun of me, where, you know what, maybe I'll start chiming in some of my guys that I know, and they're like, hey, we're doing this. What are you doing? Like, we haven't talked to you I know, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be a photographer. And so, like, you start hitting these guys up, and they're like, yeah, we could use you, man. And so, yeah, the network for me, that saved my backside on several occasions.
Yeah. I mean, it keeps coming. And somebody gave you a shout out too. Somebody says, "Don't fart on a private plane" was 100% worth watching this just for that
So
comment.
I'm going to say right now, it wasn't me, but listening to the client, who's farting on my plane? That was probably one of the, I've got story after story about that. Good times, good times.
Did anything pop up after that?
Well, kind of a follow up.
I don't know how you recovered from that.
On the resume question was, this person has 29 years of law enforcement experience with 3 different agencies. How far back should I go with my experience on my resume?
And this is my personal opinion, and don't take this. There could be resume coaches out there that say use it all because of your overall law enforcement experience. But I'm really looking at what you've done the last 5 to 15 years, to be honest, to be really honest, because like you might have been patrolman of the month 15 times in 1990. I don't care, because the last couple of years you were maybe not, right? And maybe you were just retired on duty. And that was something that I struggled with, right? Is when I'm vetting through these candidates on the phone, I want to make sure they're serious. Like they want to get into this for the right reason.
Well, and that's a good point too, because if somebody comes and interviews for a job and their reason or their why behind it is, well, I was there for 29 years and I retired and I just need something to do, is not very exciting from but it's all perspective, right? If you shift that to, I had great 29 years, I have all this experience, and now I'm just hungry for chapter 2 in my life, and this is what I'm really passionate about. That's a different conversation than, my wife wants me to get out of the house, and which happens. I've had that in an interview where people just say, well, I'm just kind of looking for something quiet where I can hide and, okay. Well.
Know thyself.
Right. Right.
Well, I think we were talking a little bit on it, but like the community outside, once you step out, is something that we were a little bit discussing earlier before the start of the show. There is a big and growing community of ex-law enforcement, ex-military that's going to support you. You just got to reach out. So you got to get past that hesitation, or they'll think I look silly for even asking. Like those cold messages on LinkedIn, I can't, if you're looking for a role right now, get the LinkedIn Premium. Not an ad or anything for them, but get it. Start networking and sending messages to people. You might not hear back from 10, but the one that you do hear back from could change your life. Right. So like that's why I advocate for LinkedIn so much. Right. So there are spammers, there are things, just to use general thing.
And on top of that, I really think community in general is huge. It's also your network. So don't get stuck in this virtual world that we're all living in with LinkedIn. Who do you know in your real life? What communities do you have? Do you have a church community, a gym community, a school community, if your parents, all of these different things? And it's one thing I tell clients, I need you to make a list of 5 people in all these different categories. Your ex-coworkers or current coworkers, your service providers, your doctor, your dentist, your car person, all of those things, your friends, your family. There's another category somewhere in there. But make a list of all the people you actually know in real life and talk to them. Hey, I'm looking at getting out of law enforcement. Do you know of any opportunities? What opportunities do you have? Just ask the darn question, because it's always no if you don't just ask. Right.
And that network may also be people that have never been in law enforcement. I mean, it may be folks that are in the type of business or, line of work that it may be. But and to circle back, when we were talking about, and you were just talking about kind of leaving, that's one thing that all got our heads nodding was we were kind of surprised that once you're gone, how quickly you're forgotten, and you know, and I think that got everybody's head nodding. And for me, I did have a worry leaving that, you know, that's my identity. What am I going to do? Who am I going to be at that point? And there was, you know, I still keep in touch with, and somebody made the comment, you learn real quick who your friends are. And there are still people I keep in touch with, but it is, I mean, when you're out, you lose contact with a lot of those people. The department I worked at, I don't know if I know anybody that's still there anymore, but it's easy to. And on the same token, I thought I was going to be lost without that identity, and I was surprised to find out that I wasn't, or that it wasn't everything that I was, or anything like that. But I don't know if...
And that's really one of those lessons learned, is that it can't be your identity. You really have to keep people outside of law enforcement, hobbies outside of law enforcement, something outside of law enforcement while you're in it, to keep those connections growing and give you opportunities later. Because
I remember that advice in the academy. An academy instructor said, make sure you maintain relationships outside of law enforcement. The friends who are not, that you have now that are not in law enforcement, keep that going, because it is. Sometimes you do this job and you see the worst in people, and, you know, it becomes an us versus them mentality. So definitely. It's, you know, it's tough.
And you're doing nothing but hanging out with cops, off duty. So you're talking about work and how mad you are. Keep that separation. You need it for yourself and your mental health and your family when you've got a family.
But to your point, there is, you know, that's what's fun. Cops have a dark sense of humor that, you know, don't
Nobody else can make fun of a dead body like a cop can.
Exactly. So I mean,
we went there.
It's tough to, and it is good to have the camaraderie and keep those relationships with the folks that that you work with. But
is that all of those questions?
There's some comments. Let me see if
While he's looking for those, Logan, I want to ask, and Tim, I'll get to you. Looking back, when you made your transition, is there one thing you wish you would have known prior to making it?
You know, that's a great question. And I would probably have to say, it's one thing I wish I knew. It'd have to be how steep a trajectory that I was able to attain was absolutely there for the taking. I thought I was going to have to put in the years that I had to put in law enforcement. You know, I expected to go and do hourly level investigations at Amazon for 5 years before I'd be looked at for a promotion. The private sector is so open right now. So I wish I would have told myself to ease up a little bit, because I took a big risk. I, you know, sold my family home. I moved into a rental in Olathe, apparently the bad part of Olathe, Kansas, right? Like, you know,
I was like, is there?
Well, apparently I learned there was, but, you know, but it was scary, right? You know, I'm taking this leap, but I didn't need to be as afraid, right? And I think that, you know, having that mentor in place and then making that move, you know, and knowing that my career trajectory can go as far as I am willing to push it. That's really what I wish I could have told myself when I was sitting in the patrol car those last several weeks before I made the decision. So
I think that's fantastic. And Tim, obviously yours wasn't planned. It was kind of forced upon you. But looking back, is there one thing you wish you would have known as it was becoming a reality that this was going to happen?
Yeah, well, as a law enforcement officer, you're exposed to a whole lot. And as we were talking, I was thinking one of the reasons why I wanted to get into photography was in my department, you had to do some of the CSI. And so I found taking pictures, the subject wasn't that fun to take pictures of, but I learned, actually, this is kind of enjoyable. And so I created a hobby outside of like the mental health, like that's huge what you're talking about. And I found the first thing I went to when I was out was, hey, I like taking pictures, let's try this. And then I found more about myself than I knew at the time. And that, you know, when people start bossing you around and you're not carrying a gun, it just doesn't work out well. So, yeah, no, finding your passion. And the thing that I'm learning now, my work may not be my passion, but I work to do my passion. So, like, even if my job or the people I work with or whatever space people are in, if you're not enjoying it, just think of you're doing it for your passion and what you're going to do later. So those things, just finding your passion. If you find something you're exposed to as a law enforcement officer, maybe start a hobby doing something, you know, and that's the whole starting your own business. And like, that's where it starts is, you know, I really enjoy doing this. And, you know, you start getting out and you know, you start, like most firemen, their real jobs are tile or something like that, you know.
Right.
Firemen.
Logan and Jess, probably for you too, I was just kind of thinking and interested, did you have a job before you left, or did you leave and then find a job?
Go
So
ahead.
it's a great question. I grew up with my father, and he, as a boomer,
Right.
he, make sure you have a job before you leave the other job, right? Which I think makes sense, right? Leaving that first job, I needed to have something for my family, for my kids. I was a single income provider for my family at the time, with a stay-at-home wife, so it was one of those situations I had to have it, right? But yeah, I really think that, having it was, going through that process the first time. I remember being told what an RSU was as a new private sector employee. Like, what's a reserve stock unit? What is this? What's a sign-on bonus? You're just going to give me money
Right.
to just say yes to this job? Like, what is this? So, yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, I would.
I was like, am I the only one wondering what that is?
I would not tell retiring law enforcement to be afraid of it as much as I would somebody that's thinking about a mid-career transition.
Right.
Because the amount of backpedaling you're going to have to do if you do step back into law enforcement is going to be significant with the
Right.
mid-year career that you're leaving behind.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And I think my perspective is a little different because, like Tim, I failed to accept that my career was over. So I had surgery in February of 16. I didn't actually turn in my papers until November, but I was still thinking about a second surgery. I need a second opinion. I need all these different things. There is absolutely no way I can draw my gun again because it's a hand issue on my gun hand. I refused, though, that whole time. Did I look at a couple of jobs? Sure, just like as a backup. Didn't have it. And then it came time to turn in my papers, and I didn't have one. I was on long-term disability, so there was some cushion there, but that's not a lot.
Right.
And at the time, my now husband was moving out of state to work at another agency, so we had decided I'm going too. And it took from November until January to get hired, and TD Ameritrade Financial Services was the first one, and I applied for law enforcement type jobs. I applied for insurance adjuster type jobs. Every job I thought I could get as an ex-cop, and nothing was happening. And I was like, what in the freaking world? Why was I a sergeant by 29 and I can't even get a job in the quote unquote real world? I was so dumbfounded, and I was
Right.
like, what the hell? So I finally got that job, and I was like, yay, I celebrated the hell out of it. I celebrated passing with the lowest score possible for the test that you had to take to get it. And then thank God my husband was like, let's go back home to Kansas City 4 months later. And I was like, yes, please, see you later. And then I did. I had to do the job hopping. But I'm thankful I did, because I was such a damn cop, and it was just in there that it took a lot to really push that out. And it took a lot of different experiences to see what I wanted. And really working with people is what I ended up wanting to do, but with people who wanted help versus forcing my help on people who didn't
Right.
want it. And so it took all that time and all those different roles to do it. Please have a job before you leave if you can help it, or at least have those lines in the water with your network.
Yeah.
It only adds to the stress of losing your career or
Right.
quitting your career. When
Makes
you
it
lose
more
it, oh
stressful.
man, whole
Yeah.
different set of emotions for sure.
Sure. I can imagine.
Yeah.
One of the other things I think of too, because I see this a lot from people making that transition, and this is probably more post-transition, once you've made the transition and you're new, and law enforcement officers can sometimes come into the corporate culture with a hammer rather than a scalpel. And that is so different because we just take command and we do this, that, and the other, and we just make things. Safety is the most important thing, and you run through. And that can be culture shock for a lot of people of figuring out how do we communicate with non-law enforcement folks. And I don't know, have you guys had that?
I'll tell you, bless the human resources professional and the operations general manager at Amazon in Kansas City, Kansas, that supported me as their loss prevention manager when I first got promoted. Because you're right, you come in like a hammer. You're like, I know incident command, I know how to control a situation. I'm lucky and blessed that at Amazon, as a former LEO, I was doing a lot of similar LEO-like things with people that didn't have law enforcement experience. So I was able to work through and navigate that. But I can absolutely see that in another corporate culture, it could be a definite problem. But yeah, I think it takes leadership. It takes, selling the personality is what got me past the door. And then they were able to see past the hammer, the rough hammer of what I brought to the table as a professional.
Right.
Yeah, when I tried to do the whole photography thing, I learned really quick about myself. And, people grabbing you and pulling you to take a picture of something that doesn't do well for my psyche. Yeah, I had one guy finger point me and I almost snapped it off and stuck it in his ear. So I figured, maybe this is not for me. I think I need to go back in security or something security-based. So, yeah, no, the transition from being a cop, being able to tell people what to do, taking that authority, and then transitioning that over to where I was at the time, yeah, it was a hard lesson.
Well, you always
steep
have
learning
that
curve.
tool in your toolkit, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
you do this or you go to jail. And then
yeah.
that tool disappears and you got to use those soft skills and
Yep.
figure out how do you
Yeah, one
put all
thing
that
Terry
together.
said on the interview I had done with him was we really just kind of beat it out of you, that we beat the cop out of you because
yeah.
you have to. If you're going to be successful in this corporate world, you got to lose that cop mindset. It was very easy, I think, for me when I went to TD Ameritrade. I got a cafeteria. I had like a gift store. I had ping pong. Like they really hook you up sometimes in these corporate settings. And I was like, what
Yeah.
is this? Like
Right.
I could get used to this for sure. And then I mean,
Right.
4 months later I was done. But I definitely got used to it very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, we have one last question, and I think it's probably a good one to end on. And it's specific to what 3 things in your background helped you get your current role. And for me, I don't know if there's 3 things in particular other than I kind of had a background in working in security and law enforcement and kind of putting those things together. But I think the biggest piece of advice I have is do the work beforehand to set yourself up, because I think if you go after it of, I have this law enforcement experience and that's what I'm hanging my hat on, you're going to be competing against others that have that same type of thing. So what is it that you're going to do? And that may be, getting a CPP or working in ASIs or getting because when you get into the corporate world, yes, you've got that law enforcement background, but how does that tie into an access control system? Or how are you tying access control with video? And how are you using SEPTED and all these different things that may be foreign to us as police officers? I would say do that work ahead of time to set yourself apart and set the table for the role that you want.
Absolutely. And I'm going to pass for myself since I didn't go the corporate world to Logan.
Yeah. I would say the law enforcement, it does help. And I think it's one thing that a lot of folks think that it's in today's political climate that is not a benefit to their resume. It absolutely is. But it's about the mindset, right? I came out of law enforcement. I felt the depression that people feel when they leave a career. But positivity has to be the first and foremost of every day you wake up. Like, I'm going to land that opportunity. I'm going to have a good conversation with somebody tomorrow. I'm going to, just keep positive, right? And I'm going to recommend a book because I like to recommend books to everybody that comes on. And a lot of law enforcement folks and military folks, maybe they've read it, maybe they haven't, they've heard of it. But Jocko Willink wrote a really, really good book called Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
Read the book.
It's a great book.
And understand how you take responsibility for everything in your life, and then things will start to look better.
Yeah, there's no more passing the buck. It is
That's
on
right.
you, everything that
That's right.
happens.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I think for me, persistence has been really not saying, you get a lot of no's, especially coming out of the gate, like not taking that no. You do learn empathy as a law enforcement officer. You may not think so. You might hate most people, but you do learn those moments, those tender moments where you're doing death notifications, and those moments where you can feel those are one of the most important. And for me, it was my good looks. So
Obviously.
I think that third one that's the kicker for. And if you're not a good-looking guy or gal, it's
Maybe stick
surgery.
with law enforcement.
Yeah,
I
don't
love
know.
your confidence. It is something to be admired, let me tell you.
That's only because I'm on camera.
And one thing I will say, I guess, for my experience, I ran as far away from law enforcement or that community or fields like that for 7 years. And I think that was truly very helpful because I was such a damn cop and that was my mindset. I needed that exposure to the real world again. So again, your next job, career may not be the end all be all. Give yourself a break. If you are that burned out with law enforcement, go get a job that is so far away from it that you learn some of these skills again and you learn how to be a human again and treat people like a human.
That's a great point. I mean, the transition doesn't have to be in the security field or the security. I mean, that transition, there's a chapter 2 that doesn't always have to involve security or in law enforcement. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think I'd add one last thing before
Good
we
looks.
sign off. Good looks too, I guess. I can't follow up to that, Tim. That was just so smooth how you laid it there. I just want to encourage everybody to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm absolutely open to just direct messages and helping folks out, whether it's interview prep or whatever it may be, whether it's just motivation. Let me know how I can help. I want to be a help to the law enforcement and military community getting out.
Me too.
Likewise.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think all of us are
Same.
in the same boat. Yep.
And that actually was one that came up earlier. Somebody asked, what about transitioning from security to law enforcement? And I think that can be a whole nother panel discussion, but I think there's a
Absolutely.
lot of folks that are interested in that transition as well. And we have a lot of folks that work for us that are looking to do that. And we do the same thing, help with interview prep and do different things like that. But that may be an interesting next panel discussion.
And as one last thing from me personally, I told Terry I was going to do this. I have a Prepping for Life After Law Enforcement course that I put together based on the 6 pillars of wellness, my own story. So there's a little bit of humanness to it. It's videos, you do it yourself. Typically it's $97, but anybody listening to this tonight, I want to give you $30 off. You just have to message me and I'll get you the link for the discounted price of it. And coaching with me is usually 6 weeks long. I would like to give you $100 off of that package price as well, if you're listening to this and you're really just needing someone to help guide you through this transition.
Nice. Yeah, and I think well worth it. I mean, I think that network building and resume and everything else, doing the work ahead of time is important. So
Awesome.
Well, appreciate everybody coming down. Did we leave
Good
anything
times,
on the table? I think we covered.
I think we got
quite a
about
bit.
as much as we can.
Well,
Until next
awesome.
time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.